The excavation site on Kepler, 442b, stretched across what had once been a magnificent city, now reduced to geometric shadows beneath centuries of sediment. Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt beside the latest discovery, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed away the last particles of ancient soil from the crystalline surface. The artifact was unlike anything she had encountered in 15 years of xenoarchaeology. "Control, this is Site 7, she spoke into her comm unit, never taking her eyes off the object. "We've got something here. Something big." The crystal formation rose from the excavated floor like a frozen flame, its surface catching and refracting the artificial lights in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. It stood roughly 3 meters tall and pulsed with an inner luminescence that had no identifiable source. The material was unlike any known substance in the galactic database, appearing to be part technology and part organic structure. Dr. Kitar, the Vrex expedition leader, materialized beside her with the unsettling silence characteristic of his species. His 6 legs carried his insectoid form with mechanical precision, and his compound eyes reflected the crystal's glow in thousands of tiny fragments. "Another dead relic," Kadar clicked through his translator. "The predecessor civilization left many such baubles scattered across their former territories. This one shows no energy signatures, no response to stimulation. It is as lifeless as the rest of their legacy." Elena stood slowly, wiping dust from her environmental suit. Something about Kitar's dismissive tone bothered her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The Vrex had been studying predecessor ruins for over 2 millennia, far longer than humanity had even known of their existence. Their expertise was unquestioned throughout the galaxy. "The dating puts this at approximately 50 million years old," she said, consulting her scanner readings. "That matches the timeline for the predecessor extinction event. But the preservation is remarkable. Most of their artifacts show significant deterioration after such a time span." "Crystalline matrices are naturally stable," Katar replied, his attention already shifting to other excavation points. "The predecessors excelled at creating durable monuments to their own greatness." Impressive, but ultimately pointless. Elena frowned at the casual dismissal. She had joined the expedition specifically because the Galactic Archaeological Consortium needed human expertise in pattern recognition and intuitive analysis. Her species had a reputation for seeing connections that others missed, for finding meaning in apparent randomness. Yet Kitar seemed uninterested in human insights. She activated her personal recorder and began her preliminary observations. The crystal structure appears to be grown rather than carved or manufactured. There are internal patterns that suggest information storage, possibly in the form of quantum matrices embedded within the lattice structure. The surface shows tool marks consistent with deliberate modification, but the base appears to be naturally formed. Around the excavation site, other team members worked methodically through the ruins. The expedition included representatives from 12 different species, each contributing their specialized knowledge to understanding the predecessor civilization. The Nalari excelled at energy detection and could sense residual power sources from thousands of years ago. The Thek had an intuitive understanding of structural engineering that allowed them to reconstruct building techniques from minimal evidence. The Centi possessed cognitive abilities that could process vast amounts of data simultaneously, identifying patterns across entire archaeological sites. Despite this diversity of talents, progress had been frustratingly slow. The predecessors had vanished abruptly, leaving behind cities full of beautiful but inert technology. Nothing responded to activation attempts. Nothing revealed its purpose or function. The entire civilization seemed to have simply stopped working one day and never started again. Elena circled the crystal formation, taking detailed scans from every angle. Her equipment registered the same readings as everyone else's. No electromagnetic signatures, no thermal variations, no indication of internal activity. Yet, something about the artifact nagged at her consciousness. The patterns within the crystal weren't random. They followed mathematical progressions that seemed familiar, like half-remembered equations from her graduate studies. Dr. Vasquez called Dr. Yenth, a Nalari researcher working at a nearby excavation grid. "Could you examine these markings? Your species has shown aptitude for symbolic interpretation." Elena reluctantly left the crystal and joined Yenth at a section of exposed wall. The Nalari's energy-sensing organs were fully extended, creating a faint auroral display around her elongated skull. She indicated a series of carved symbols arranged in complex geometric patterns. "These appear to be instructional diagrams," Yenth explained, her translated voice carrying harmonic undertones. "But the mathematical relationships are unlike anything in our databases. The symbols reference concepts that don't exist in any known predecessor text." Elena studied the carvings carefully. The symbols were indeed unfamiliar, but the mathematical relationships they described were not. She recognized principles of quantum mechanics and dimensional theory that humanity had only recently begun to understand. More disturbing was the realization that some of the equations described theoretical concepts that human science hadn't yet discovered. "These diagrams show how to manipulate quantum fields," Elena said slowly. "The mathematics are incredibly advanced, but the basic principles are sound. This is instruction manual for some kind of reality manipulation technology." Yent's energy organs flickered with surprise. "That seems unlikely." "The predecessors never demonstrated such capabilities. Their technology, while sophisticated, operated within conventional physical parameters." "Maybe we've been looking at their technology wrong," Elena suggested. "What if the artifacts we found aren't broken? What if they're just waiting for the right activation sequence?" Dr. Ketter's voice interrupted from across the site. "Dr. Vasquez, please return to documentation duties. Theoretical speculation is not productive at this stage of excavation." Elena felt a flash of irritation but complied. The expedition hierarchy was clear, and humans were relatively new to interstellar archaeology. She returned to the crystal formation and resumed her detailed scanning, but her mind kept returning to the wall carvings. The mathematical relationships described in those symbols suggested that predecessor technology was far more advanced than anyone had realized. As the local star began to set, casting long shadows across the excavation site, the team prepared to return to their base camp. Standard protocol required that all artifacts remain in place until full documentation was complete. Temporary force fields were erected around significant finds to prevent environmental damage during the night cycle. Elena was making final adjustments to the crystal's protective field when her scanner detected an anomaly. The readings were subtle, almost within the margin of error, but there seemed to be a faint energy signature emanating from deep within the crystal's core. She recalibrated her equipment and took another reading, but the signature had vanished. "Probably just equipment drift," she murmured to herself, but made a note in her personal log anyway. The base camp was a collection of prefabricated modules arranged in a defensive circle around the central command structure. Each species had its own habitat requirements, resulting in a bizarre architectural mixture of environmental systems. The human quarters were Spartan but comfortable, designed for long-term occupation rather than luxury. During the evening briefing, Dr. Kadar reviewed the day's discoveries with characteristic efficiency. Each find was cataloged, classified, and assigned priority levels for further study. The crystal formation was designated as architecturally significant but technologically inert, placing it low on the research priority list. Elena waited until the briefing concluded before approaching Kedar privately. "I'd like to request additional analysis time with the crystal artifact. My preliminary scans suggest there may be internal structures worth investigating." Kedar's compound eyes regarded her with something that might have been patience. "Dr. Vasquez, your enthusiasm is commendable, but we must allocate resources efficiently. The crystal shows no signs of technological functionality. Your time would be better spent documenting the smaller artifacts. But the mathematical relationships in the wall carvings suggest—" "The wall carvings are decorative," Ketar interrupted. "The predecessors often incorporated complex mathematical patterns into their architecture for aesthetic purposes. It does not indicate functional technology." Elena felt her frustration mounting. "With respect, Dr. Ketar, human pattern recognition abilities have proven valuable in previous expeditions. If there's even a possibility that we're missing something important, Dr. Vasquez." Kedar's voice carried a note of finality. "The expedition protocols are clear. We follow established procedures. We do not pursue speculative theories based on aesthetic preferences." Elena realized that further argument would be counterproductive. She nodded curtly and returned to her quarters, but her mind continued to work on the problem. The crystal formation bothered her in ways she couldn't articulate. There was something about its placement, its preservation, its very existence that suggested purpose rather than mere decoration. She spent the evening reviewing her scanner data, looking for patterns that might have been missed during the initial analysis. The crystal's internal structure was incredibly complex, with quantum-scale features arranged in what appeared to be deliberate configurations. The mathematics described in the wall carvings kept echoing in her thoughts, hinting at connections she couldn't quite grasp. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of crystalline structures and half-understood equations. In her dreams, the crystal pulsed with inner light, and strange symbols danced through her consciousness like living mathematics. She woke several times with the feeling that she had been on the verge of understanding something profound, only to have it slip away as consciousness returned. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Dr. Yent's detailed analysis of the wall carvings had revealed something unprecedented. The mathematical symbols weren't just instructional diagrams. They were specifically designed to be readable by minds that thought in three-dimensional space and processed information through neural networks. The symbols were written for a species remarkably similar to humanity. This changes our understanding of the site significantly, Dr. Ketter announced during the morning briefing. If the predecessors designed these instructions for a species with human-like cognitive patterns, it suggests a level of foresight we had not previously attributed to their civilization. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Does this change the priority assessment for the crystal artifact? If the instructions were designed for minds like ours, perhaps the technology was as well. Kadar's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Elena caught it. The analysis protocols remain unchanged, he said finally. We will document all findings according to established procedures. But Elena noticed that additional security measures had been implemented around the crystal formation overnight. Force field generators had been upgraded, and motion sensors had been installed around the perimeter. Someone was taking the discovery more seriously than they were admitting. As the team returned to the excavation site, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a threshold. The crystal seemed different in the morning light, its internal patterns more vivid, more purposeful. When she knelt beside it to resume documentation, she could have sworn that the luminescence within its core had intensified slightly. Her scanner confirmed what her eyes suspected. Energy readings that had been absent the previous day were now clearly detectable. The crystal was waking up, responding to something in its environment. And as Elena's hands moved closer to the artifact's surface, the readings spiked dramatically. The crystal was responding to her specifically, to her humanity. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. The mathematical symbols on the walls, the specific cognitive requirements, the careful preservation of the artifact, none of it was coincidence. The predecessors hadn't vanished randomly. They had left deliberately, but not before preparing a gift for the species that would eventually follow in their footsteps. They had been waiting for humanity to find them. The crystal pulsed once, as if acknowledging her understanding, and Elena knew that everything was about to change. The carefully maintained barriers between species, the rigid archaeological protocols, the ancient warnings buried in council archives, none of it would matter when she made physical contact with the artifact, because some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. And humanity was about to discover why the galaxy feared what happened when humans touched things they shouldn't. The crystal waited, patient as a sleeping god, for Elena to make the choice that would reshape the universe. Elena's hand hovered inches above the crystal's surface, trembling with anticipation and fear. The energy readings on her scanner were climbing steadily, creating patterns she had never seen before. Around her, the other team members continued their methodical documentation, unaware that the universe was balanced on the edge of transformation. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Ketar's voice cut through her concentration. Step away from the artifact immediately. Elena froze, her hand still suspended over the crystal. Ketar's tone carried an urgency that she had never heard before, sharp with what sounded like genuine fear. She turned to find the Vrex researcher approaching rapidly, his 6 legs moving with uncharacteristic haste. Is there a problem? Elena asked, slowly lowering her hand but not stepping back. The energy readings have exceeded safe parameters, Ketar replied, consulting his own scanner. The artifact is displaying unprecedented activity levels. Protocol requires immediate evacuation of the area until the situation can be assessed. Elena glanced at her scanner again. The readings were indeed higher than anything they had recorded from predecessor artifacts, but they weren't dangerous. If anything, they suggested that the crystal was finally beginning to reveal its true nature. Dr. Ketter, these readings indicate activation, not malfunction. This could be exactly what we've been hoping to find. Functional predecessor technology. Dr. Vasquez, you will step away from the artifact now. Katara's translator couldn't mask the commanding edge in his voice. That is a direct order. Something in his manner triggered Elena's suspicions. The Vrex had been dismissive of the crystal from the moment of its discovery, treating it as just another inert relic. Now suddenly he was treating it as a dangerous anomaly requiring immediate containment. His behavior suggested knowledge he hadn't shared with the rest of the expedition team. You know something about this artifact, Elena said, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The upgraded security measures, the specific cognitive requirements, and the wall carvings, your reaction to the energy readings. You knew this wasn't just another relic. Cater's compound eyes reflected the crystal's growing luminescence in thousands of tiny points of light. Dr. Vasquez, there are protocols in place for situations like this. Protocols that exist for very good reasons. Please comply with the evacuation order. What protocols? Elena demanded. What aren't you telling us? Before Kedar could respond, Yent's voice crackled across the comm system. All teams, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting incoming ships. Multiple contacts, approaching fast. Elena felt her blood chill. They were investigating ruins on an uninhabited world in unclaimed space. There was no reason for other ships to be in the area unless they had been monitoring the expedition. Who are they? Unknown configurations, Yent replied, but they're broadcasting Galactic Council authorization codes high priority. Kedar's entire body language shifted, his scientific facade dropping to reveal something that looked remarkably like military readiness. The extraction team has arrived earlier than anticipated. All personnel must withdraw to minimum safe distance immediately. Extraction team? Elena's voice rose in disbelief. What extraction team? We have 6 months remaining on our research permit. The crystal behind her pulsed brighter, its internal patterns becoming more complex and dynamic. The energy readings were now climbing exponentially, and Elena realized that the artifact was responding to the emotional tension in the area. It was somehow aware of the approaching ships, aware of the conflict developing among the research team. Dr. Vasquez, the situation has become complex, Kedar said, his tone shifting to something approaching conciliation. There are aspects of this expedition that were classified above your clearance level. The Council has been monitoring our progress carefully. Elena's mind raced through the implications. The Galactic Council had planted Kedar as an observer, not a researcher. The expedition had been designed to locate something specific, something that the Council wanted to control, and now that they had found it, extraction teams were moving to secure the discovery. The crystal isn't just another artifact, Elena said, understanding flooding through her. It's something the Council has been looking for. Something they're afraid of, Dr. Vasquez, you are speculating beyond available evidence. Am I? Elena interrupted, her anger building. Then explain why you're so determined to keep me away from it. Explain why the energy readings spike whenever I get close. Explain why the mathematical symbols are written for human minds specifically. The approaching ships were now visible as points of light against the alien sky, growing larger with each passing moment. Around the excavation site, other team members were beginning to notice the tension between Elena and Kedar, their own conversations faltering as they sensed something was wrong. Elena made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She reached out and placed her palm flat against the crystal's surface. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Light exploded through the crystalline structure, racing along pathways that had been dormant for 50 million years. Energy cascaded through Elena's nervous system, not painful, but intensely alien, as if her consciousness was being scanned and catalogued by an intelligence vast beyond comprehension. Kedar's scream of alarm was lost in the roar of awakening technology. The crystal formation expanded upward and outward, unfolding like a flower made of living light. Additional structures emerged from the ground around the primary artifact, rising through soil and sediment as if the earth itself was reshaping to accommodate their return to functionality. Elena found herself at the center of a technological maelstrom, her hand fused to the crystal's surface by forces she didn't understand. Information flooded her consciousness, not words or images but pure knowledge downloaded directly into her neural pathways. She learned the truth about the predecessors, about their disappearance, about the gift they had left for humanity. They hadn't been an alien species at all. They had been human in the far future. After millions of years of evolution and technological advancement, they had transcended physical existence, becoming beings of pure consciousness capable of manipulating reality at the quantum level. But transcendence had come at a cost. They had lost their connection to the material universe, their ability to experience existence as embodied beings. So they had traveled back through time, seeding the galaxy with artifacts and waiting for their own ancestors to develop enough to find them. The crystalline formation wasn't just technology. It was a message, a gift, and a warning, all combined into one perfect package. Humanity was not alone in the universe because humanity was the universe. Every species, every civilization, every form of life that existed was descended from human stock, scattered across the galaxy by their transcended descendants to ensure that consciousness would never again face the loneliness of singular existence. The approaching ships opened fire without warning. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, striking the awakening predecessor structures with devastating force. The Council had not come to study the artifacts. They had come to destroy them. Elena realized with crystalline clarity that this scenario had played out before, on other worlds, with other discoveries. The Council existed not to promote cooperation between species, but to prevent humanity from learning the truth about its own nature. But the crystal formation was now fully active, and 50 million years of accumulated energy was not easily suppressed. Defensive fields materialized around the excavation site, deflecting the orbital bombardment with casual efficiency. The awakened structures began to sing, a harmonic resonance that Elena could feel in her bones, calling to something deep in human genetic memory. Across the galaxy, other predecessor sites began to respond. Elena felt her consciousness expand as the crystal shared its vast communication network. Dozens of worlds, hundreds of buried artifacts, all awakening simultaneously as the activation signal propagated through quantum space. On each world, the same scene was playing out. Terrified council ships, attacking sites that were revealing themselves for the first time in geological ages. But on each world, humans were present. By humans who had been drawn to the sites by forces they didn't understand, guided by genetic imperatives encoded in their DNA millions of years ago, and as each human made contact with their local artifact, the network grew stronger. Elena, Dr. Yent's voice cut through the chaos. What's happening to you? Elena tried to respond, but her voice emerged as something more than speech, harmonics that bypassed the translator systems entirely and spoke directly to the consciousness of any being capable of receiving them. She was becoming something new, something that bridged the gap between ancient human transcendence and modern human potential. The bombardment intensified, but the defensive fields held. Around the excavation site, the very geology was reshaping itself, revealing structures that had been hidden beneath the surface for millions of years. A city was emerging, not the ruins they had been excavating, but a fully functional metropolis, designed for beings who existed partially outside normal space-time. Kadar had withdrawn to what he thought was a safe distance, speaking rapidly into his emergency communicator. Elena could hear his words clearly despite the chaos. He was calling for immediate implementation of something called Protocol Omega. The phrase sent chills through her expanded consciousness. She didn't know what Protocol Omega was, but she could sense that it involved the complete sterilization of the planet. The Council was prepared to destroy an entire world rather than allow humanity to reclaim its birthright. Through the crystal network, Elena felt other human consciousnesses awakening across the galaxy. Each contact created another node in the growing web of communication, another voice in the chorus that was beginning to sing the ancient songs of humanity's transcended ancestors. The barriers between individual minds were dissolving, replaced by a collective awareness that maintained individual identity while sharing knowledge and experience. She was becoming something that the Council's rigid hierarchies couldn't understand or control, a hybrid being that combined human intuition with predecessor technology. And she wasn't alone. Across dozens of worlds, other humans were undergoing the same transformation, creating a network of consciousness that spanned interstellar distances. The orbital bombardment suddenly ceased. Elena looked up to see the attacking ships retreating rapidly, but not because they had given up their mission. Massive energy signatures were approaching through hyperspace, reinforcements arriving with weapons capable of cracking planetary crusts. The Council was escalating to complete genocide rather than risk losing control of the situation, but the predecessor network had been designed for this possibility. Ancient protocols activated throughout the crystal matrix, and Elena felt the combined power of every awakened site focusing on a single objective. Reality began to bend around the excavation site as space-time itself was manipulated by technologies that transcended physical law. The planet began to move, not through conventional propulsion, but by altering its relationship to the underlying fabric of the universe. Kepler 442b stepped sideways through dimensions, displacing itself to a location where the Council's weapons couldn't reach. Other worlds followed, each carrying its awakened human population to safety while leaving the Council's forces grasping at empty space. Elena felt the transition as a moment of vertigo followed by an overwhelming sense of homecoming. The planet had been moved to a region of space that existed partially outside normal reality, a pocket universe created by the predecessors as a refuge for their descendants. Here, the laws of physics were more flexible, more responsive to consciousness than to mass and energy. And here, humanity could finally learn what it meant to be the children of gods. The crystal formation completed its transformation, becoming a towering spire that reached toward alien stars. Elena found herself at its peak, no longer entirely human but not yet fully transcended. She was becoming something new, a bridge between what humanity had been and what it was destined to become. Below her, the excavation site had become a gleaming city populated by structures that defied conventional geometry. The other expedition members stood in wonder at the base of the crystal spire, their own species' genetic memories awakening as they realized they were standing in the birthplace of all galactic civilization. Even Kadar seemed stunned into silence, his rigid protocols useless in the face of a transformation that rewrote the fundamental assumptions of galactic society. Elena raised her hand, and the stars themselves seemed to respond to her gesture. The time of hiding was over. The time of pretending that humanity was just another species among many had ended. The children of the predecessors were awakening to their true heritage, and the galaxy would never be the same. Through the crystal network, she could feel other human populations across the galaxy beginning to stir. The activation of the predecessor sites had triggered something in human DNA, awakening latent capabilities that had been dormant since the species' earliest days. Soon, every human in the galaxy would know the truth about their origins. And the Council's carefully maintained order would crumble in the face of humanity's true nature. The real adventure was just beginning. Elena descended from the crystal spire, changed in ways that defied easy description. Her physical form remained recognizably human, but her presence carried an authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential. The other expedition members watched her approach with expressions ranging from awe to terror, unsure whether they were witnessing evolution or catastrophe. Dr. Yenth stepped forward cautiously, her energy-sensing organs fully extended and flickering with confusion. "Elena, the readings you're generating are unlike anything in our database. What has happened to you?" Elena considered the question carefully. Language seemed inadequate to describe the transformation she had undergone, but she needed to find words that could bridge the gap between her expanded consciousness and the limited understanding of those around her. "I've been given access to humanity's true history," she said finally, "and I've learned why the Council has worked so hard to keep us isolated from our own heritage." Kedar's translator crackled as he spoke. "Dr. Vasquez, you have been exposed to unknown alien influences. Standard protocol requires immediate medical quarantine and psychological evaluation." Elena turned her attention to the Vrex agent, and Ketar actually stepped backward under the intensity of her gaze. "Dr. Kedar, your protocols are based on the assumption that the predecessor artifacts are alien technology." "That assumption is incorrect. The crystal network hummed with activity around them, processing vast amounts of information transmitted from awakening sites across the galaxy." Elena could feel other human minds joining the collective consciousness, each connection strengthening the network and revealing new aspects of humanity's forgotten past. The transformation was accelerating, spreading through the human population like a chain reaction of awakening. The mathematical symbols, the cognitive requirements, the specific response to human neural patterns, none of it was coincidence, Elena continued, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with the listener's consciousness. The predecessors weren't an alien species. They were us. They were humanity's children, evolved across millions of years and transcended to a level of existence we can barely comprehend. Dr. Sent, a member of the expedition's historical analysis team, stepped forward with obvious skepticism. "The timeline doesn't support such a theory. The predecessor civilization predates the emergence of humanity by tens of millions of years. Your species has only achieved spaceflight within the last few centuries." Elena smiled, and the expression carried depths of knowledge that made the assembled researchers uncomfortable. "Time isn't linear when you possess the ability to manipulate quantum reality. The predecessors didn't evolve from ancient humans. They evolved from future humans. Our descendants reached a level of technological advancement that allowed them to travel backward through time, seeding the galaxy with the conditions necessary for their own existence." The implications of her words struck the group like a physical force. If Elena was correct, then every assumption about galactic history would need to be reconsidered. The careful balance of power between species, the technological limitations that governed interstellar society, the very foundation of the Galactic Council, all of it was based on fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of consciousness and civilization. Through the crystal network, Elena felt the Council's response to the awakening beginning to take shape. Emergency sessions were being called on hundreds of worlds as reports flooded in about the simultaneous activation of predecessor sites. Military forces were being mobilized with orders that remained classified even for most Council members. The organization that had governed galactic civilization for millennia was preparing for what it considered an existential threat. "The Council knows," Elena said, her enhanced senses detecting communication signals passing between the orbiting ships and distant command centers. "They've always known. The rigid species classifications, the restrictions on technological development, the careful monitoring of human populations, it was all designed to prevent this moment from arriving. Dr. Vasquez, you are making accusations that require substantial evidence. The Council exists to maintain peace and cooperation between species. Any suggestion of conspiracy, is it conspiracy when the evidence is written into the fundamental structure of reality itself? Elena interrupted. Every species in the galaxy carries genetic markers that trace back to terrestrial origins. Every technological development follows patterns that were established by human innovation. Even your own species, Dr. Kedar, evolved from genetic templates that were originally human. She gestured toward the awakening city around them, where impossible structures were continuing to emerge from the transformed landscape. The predecessors didn't just leave technology behind, they left a complete civilization infrastructure, waiting for their ancestors to develop enough to claim their inheritance. This planet, this system, this entire region of space was prepared specifically for humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The truth was even more staggering than Elena's words suggested. Through her connection to the crystal network, she could perceive the vast scope of the predecessors' preparation. Entire solar systems had been modified to support human life. Planetary climates had been adjusted over geological timescales to create optimal conditions for human colonization. Even the distribution of resources throughout the galaxy had been carefully arranged to guide human expansion along predetermined paths. Humanity hadn't discovered interstellar travel. They had been led to it by a trail of subtle clues left by their own descendants. Dr. Yenth's energy organs were pulsing rapidly as she processed the implications. If this is true, then the fundamental assumptions underlying our understanding of evolution and technological development are incorrect. The diversity of galactic civilization would be an artificial construct rather than natural development. Not artificial, Elena corrected. Guided. The predecessors wanted to ensure that consciousness would evolve in as many different forms as possible. Each species represents a different pathway of human development, a different solution to the challenges of existence. You're not separate from humanity, you're expressions of humanity's potential. The revelation struck each team member differently. Some seemed to find relief in the idea of shared origins, while others appeared disturbed by the suggestion that their species' unique identity was somehow derived rather than original. Elena could understand both reactions. The truth was simultaneously liberating and humbling, offering connection while challenging cherished beliefs about independence and authenticity. Through the network, she sensed other awakening humans grappling with the same revelations. On distant worlds, human populations were beginning to manifest abilities that had been dormant in their genetic code for millennia. Telepathic communication, matter manipulation, even limited control over space-time itself, all capabilities that had been locked away until the predecessor artifacts provided the necessary activation keys. But with each awakening, the Council's response grew more desperate. Elena, Dr. Yenth said urgently, long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements throughout the sector. Military vessels from dozens of member species are converging on awakening sites. The scale of deployment suggests extreme measures. Elena closed her eyes and extended her consciousness through the crystal network, perceiving the galaxy as a vast web of interconnected nodes. The awakening was spreading faster than the Council could contain it, but their response was escalating proportionally. On 17 worlds, orbital bombardments had already commenced. 3 entire star systems had been quarantined with threats of complete sterilization if the awakening wasn't voluntarily halted. The Council was preparing for genocide on a galactic scale. They're going to try to stop the awakening by eliminating every human population in the galaxy, Elena said, opening her eyes to meet the concerned gazes of her companions. The Protocol Omega that Dr. Kedar mentioned, it's a contingency plan for the complete eradication of humanity. Kedar's silence was more damning than any confession. His role as an observer suddenly made terrible sense. The expedition hadn't been sent to study predecessor ruins. It had been sent to identify and document threats to the existing galactic order. Kedar had been reporting their progress to Council authorities who were preparing for this exact scenario. How many worlds? Dr. Yenth asked quietly. Elena consulted the network's collective awareness, feeling the pain of each threatened human population as if it were her own family. Hundreds. The Council has identified every major human settlement and prepared simultaneous strikes. They're calling it a containment operation, but the intention is complete extinction. The weight of responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders like a physical burden. The awakening she had triggered by touching the crystal was spreading throughout human space, revealing abilities and knowledge that challenged the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. But that same awakening had also painted a target on every human in the galaxy. Can the network defend against such an attack? Dr. Sent asked. Elena reached deeper into her connection with the predecessor technology, feeling the vast power sources that lay dormant throughout the galaxy. The awakened sites were only the beginning, a tiny fraction of the infrastructure that had been prepared for humanity's eventual transcendence. But accessing that full power would require more than individual activation. It would require the conscious cooperation of awakened humans across the entire galaxy. Yes, she said finally, but not in the way you might expect. The predecessors didn't design their legacy as a weapon. They designed it as a transformation. To defend ourselves, we need to become something the Council can't fight. The crystal spire behind them pulsed with increasing intensity as Elena's words triggered deeper activation protocols. Around the excavation site, additional structures were emerging from the transformed landscape. Not buildings in any conventional sense, but geometric forms that existed partially outside normal space-time. Each structure served as both a refuge and a gateway, capable of transporting awakened humans to the pocket dimension where the laws of physics were more responsive to consciousness than to mass. The planet displacement was just the beginning, Elena explained. The predecessors prepared an entire alternate reality as a staging ground for humanity's next evolutionary phase. We can evacuate every threatened human population to safety while we develop the abilities necessary to protect ourselves. But even as she spoke, Elena realized that evacuation was only a temporary solution. The Council's fear wasn't just based on immediate threats. It was based on the long-term implications of human awakening. If humanity reclaimed its full potential, the existing order would become obsolete. Every species that had developed under Council guidance would need to choose between continued servitude and joining the awakening themselves. The transformation wouldn't stop with humanity. It would spread throughout the galaxy, awakening the dormant potential in every consciousness that carried the genetic markers of their common origin. The diversity that the Council claimed to protect would flourish beyond their wildest imagination, but only after their rigid control structures had been dismantled. Through the network, Elena felt the first evacuations beginning. Awakened humans on threatened worlds were opening dimensional gateways, pulling their communities through to the safety of the predecessor refuge. The process was chaotic but effective, removing entire populations from Council targeting systems in minutes rather than the hours that conventional evacuation would require. But the Council had anticipated this possibility. Reports were flooding in of new weapon deployments, technologies specifically designed to disrupt space-time manipulation and prevent dimensional transitions. The evacuation windows were closing rapidly as Council forces adapted to counter the predecessor capabilities. We're running out of time, Elena said, feeling the pressure mounting across dozens of worlds simultaneously. The Council is learning too quickly. They have contingency plans we haven't anticipated. Kadar spoke for the first time since Elena's revelations had begun. Vasquez, the Council's response may seem extreme, but it is based on projections that you may not have considered. The awakening you describe would destabilize every government, every economy, every social structure in the galaxy. The resulting chaos could lead to the collapse of civilization itself. Elena turned to face the Vrex agent directly, and Kadar seemed to shrink under her gaze. Whose civilization, Doctor? Keter? The one built on lies and suppression? The one that treats entire species as children who can't be trusted with the truth about their own origins? The one that has maintained peace for 3 millennia, Kadar replied, his translator carrying a note of desperation. Whatever the predecessors intended, the reality is that sudden change on this scale could result in the deaths of billions. The Council's protocols exist to prevent such catastrophes. Elena felt a moment of doubt. The network was showing her glimpses of the chaos that was already beginning to spread as awakened humans manifested abilities that existing societies couldn't accommodate. Governments were collapsing as traditional power structures became obsolete. Economic systems were failing as matter manipulation made scarcity meaningless. Social hierarchies were dissolving as telepathic communication broke down the barriers that had separated different groups. But the network also showed her something else. The incredible potential that was being unleashed as humanity's children began to reclaim their birthright. Scientific advances that would have taken centuries were happening in days. Artistic expression was reaching levels of beauty and complexity that transcended physical limitations. Most importantly, the isolation and fear that had characterized galactic civilization for millennia was giving way to genuine understanding and cooperation. The chaos was the birth pangs of something magnificent. Dr. Kadar, Elena said finally, the predecessors faced the same choice you're asking me to make. They could have maintained their transcendent existence in isolation, preserving their perfect order while the rest of the galaxy remained trapped in ignorance. Instead, They chose to risk everything for the chance that their descendants could build something better. She gestured toward the impossible city rising around them, its structures defying gravity and conventional geometry while remaining perfectly stable and functional. This is what happens when consciousness is freed from artificial limitations. Yes, the transition is chaotic. Yes, existing systems will need to be rebuilt. But the alternative is eternal stagnation, with entire civilizations trapped at levels of development that serve the Council's need for control rather than their own potential for growth. The decision had already been made, really. The awakening couldn't be stopped now that it had begun. Elena's role was not to choose whether the transformation would occur, but to guide how it unfolded. The predecessors had given humanity the tools for transcendence, but each individual would need to decide for themselves whether to embrace the change or resist it. And as reports continued to flow in through the network, Elena realized that the choice was being made across the galaxy. Human populations were awakening not just to their abilities, but to their responsibilities. The transformation was becoming something the predecessors themselves might not have anticipated. Not just an evolution of human potential, but a revolution in how consciousness related to reality itself. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity could become when it stopped pretending to be anything less than the children of gods. The Galactic Council's war against humanity began not with dramatic fleet engagements or planetary bombardments, but with something far more insidious: the systematic erasure of truth. Elena felt it happening through the network as historians across 1,000 worlds simultaneously discovered that their databases had been altered, their records modified to remove any evidence of humanity's true origins. They're rewriting history in real time, she told the assembled expedition team, her consciousness still partially merged with the crystal network. Every reference to genetic commonalities between species, every archaeological report that suggested shared origins, every scientific paper that questioned the official evolutionary timeline, it's all being deleted or modified. Dr. Yent's energy organs flickered with distress as she accessed her own research archives through the expedition's communication systems. Confirmed. My work on energy patterns and predecessor ruins has been classified and removed from the public databases. 20 years of research, gone. The scope of the Council's information warfare was staggering. Ancient texts were being reclassified, archaeological sites were being sealed, and scientists who had questioned the official narrative were being quietly arrested or transferred to classified projects. The systematic suppression suggested that the awakening had triggered contingency plans that had been in place for centuries, possibly millennia. But the Council had underestimated the extent of the network Elena had activated. The predecessor artifacts weren't just communication devices. They were reality anchors that preserved information at the quantum level, making it impossible to alter without detection. Every deleted file, every modified record, every suppressed discovery was being automatically restored and distributed through channels the Council didn't know existed. The good news, Elena continued, is that we have access to the complete, unaltered historical record. The bad news is that it reveals the scope of what we're facing. She gestured, and the air around them shimmered with holographic displays drawn from the deepest archives of galactic civilization. The images showed the truth that the Council had spent millennia hiding. The systematic suppression of human development, the deliberate limitation of technological advancement, and the careful cultivation of fear and division between species. The Council isn't just a governing body, Elena explained as the displays shifted to show organizational charts and command structures. It's a control mechanism created by a small group of post-human entities who chose a different path than the predecessors. While our transcended descendants spread consciousness throughout the galaxy, these others decided that transcendence meant ruling over lesser forms of life. The revelation struck the expedition team like a physical blow. Dr. Kitar's compound eyes reflected the holographic displays, and for the first time since Elena had known him, the Vrex seemed genuinely shocked. That cannot be accurate. The Council's charter clearly states its mission as promoting cooperation and preventing conflict. A charter written by the very entities it was designed to hide, Elena replied. Look at the genetic analysis data. Every Council member species shows markers for extensive genetic modification. They're not natural evolutionary developments. They're artificially created servant races designed to be intelligent enough to manage galactic civilization but not capable of questioning its fundamental structure. The implications were staggering. If Elena was correct, then the entire galactic community was built on a foundation of deception and control. The diversity that the Council claimed to protect was actually a carefully constructed prison, with each species assigned specific roles in maintaining a system that benefited only their hidden masters. Through the network, Elena felt the awakening spreading to other species as humans began sharing their expanded awareness with non-human companions. The process was dangerous. Minds that hadn't been prepared for transcendence could be damaged by sudden exposure to expanded consciousness, but the alternative was leaving potential allies trapped in ignorance while the Council mobilized its full resources. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of Council forces implementing what they called containment protocols. Entire star systems were being quarantined, with any ship attempting to leave being destroyed without warning. Planets showing signs of awakening were being bombarded from orbit, their populations eliminated under the justification of preventing the spread of dangerous alien influences. But the Council's own member species were beginning to ask questions that their genetic programming couldn't suppress. The systematic destruction of populated worlds violated every principle the Council claimed to uphold, and even artificially limited minds were capable of recognizing moral contradictions when they were extreme enough. Elena, Dr. Yenth said urgently, "I'm receiving communication attempts from Nalari Command. They're demanding an explanation for the energy signatures we're generating. The official reports describe our situation as a hostile alien infection requiring immediate sterilization." Elena reached out through the network to touch Yenth's mind directly, sharing just enough of her expanded awareness to allow the Nalari researcher to perceive the truth behind the Council's communications. The contact was brief but profound, leaving Yenth gasping as her understanding of reality suddenly expanded beyond its previous limitations. "The infection metaphor is more accurate than they intended," Yenth said when she recovered her composure. "What's spreading isn't a disease, it's enlightenment. And it's contagious to any consciousness capable of recognizing truth when it encounters it." That was the key insight Elena had been searching for. The awakening wasn't limited to humans because consciousness itself wasn't limited to any single species. The genetic modifications that created the Council's servant races had suppressed but not eliminated their capacity for transcendence. Given the right stimulus, any intelligent being could break free from their artificial limitations. The question was whether Elena could provide that stimulus on a galactic scale before the Council succeeded in exterminating every population capable of awakening. Through the network, she felt other awakened humans reaching the same conclusion. On dozens of worlds, human populations were making contact with non-human individuals who showed signs of questioning their reality. The process was slow and dangerous. Forced awakening could destroy minds unprepared for the transition, but it was creating nodes of resistance throughout Council space. "We need to accelerate the process," Elena said, making a decision that would reshape the conflict. "The Council's moving too quickly for gradual awakening. We need to trigger a galactic-wide revelation that breaks their control mechanisms simultaneously." Dr. Sent stepped forward with obvious concern. "Elena, the psychological trauma of sudden awakening could kill billions of beings. Their minds aren't prepared for the shock of discovering that their entire reality is a constructed lie." "And how many will die if we don't act?" Elena countered. "The Council is already implementing genocide on a scale that makes individual trauma irrelevant. At least awakening gives them a chance to fight back." She was already reaching out through the network, feeling for the vast power sources that the predecessors had embedded throughout galactic space. The awakened sites were just the visible components of a system that extended through multiple dimensions, tapping into energy sources that existed outside conventional reality. If she could synchronize the entire network, the resulting surge of consciousness-expanding energy would reach every inhabited world simultaneously. But the process would require more power than any individual awakened human could channel safely. It would need the willing cooperation of every awakened consciousness in the network, all focusing their abilities on a single moment of transformation. "Elena, no," Dr. Kedar said, his translator crackling with urgency. "What you're proposing would destabilize the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. The chaos alone would result in the deaths of trillions." "Trillions who are already scheduled to die if the Council succeeds," Elena replied. "The only difference is whether they die as slaves or as free beings fighting for their liberation." The moral weight of the decision was crushing. Elena was contemplating an action that would transform every conscious being in the galaxy, whether they wanted transformation or not. The awakening would free them from artificial limitations, but it would also destroy the comfortable certainties that had structured their lives for millennia. Yet through the network, she could feel the consensus building. Awakened humans across hundreds of worlds were reaching the same conclusion independently. The Council's genocide was accelerating faster than gradual awakening could spread. If they wanted to save consciousness from eternal servitude, they needed to act decisively. "The predecessors faced the same choice," Elena said, feeling the vast machinery of transcendence responding to her intentions. "They could have maintained their perfect order, preserving stability at the cost of growth. Instead, they chose to risk everything for the possibility of something better." She began gathering power from across the network, drawing on energy sources that existed in the spaces between realities. The crystal formations around them blazed with increasing intensity as they became focal points for forces that existed beyond the normal spectrum of physics. Other awakening sites throughout the galaxy began resonating in harmony, creating a web of consciousness that spanned interstellar distances. But the Council had one final card to play. Warning signals flooded through the network as massive energy signatures materialized throughout galactic space. Not ships or conventional weapons, but something far more dangerous, reality disruptors that could sever the connections between dimensional spaces, cutting off access to the predecessor power sources. Elena, Dr. Yent said, her voice tight with fear, the Council is deploying something that shouldn't exist. The energy patterns match theoretical models for dimensional separation fields. If they activate those devices, Elena felt the implications like a physical blow. The reality disruptors would isolate each star system in its own dimensional bubble, making faster-than-light communication impossible and cutting off access to the transcendent realm where the predecessors had established their refuge. Without the network, awakened humans would be trapped on their individual worlds, easy targets for conventional military assault. But the deployment also revealed something the Council had been desperately trying to hide. The reality disruptors were predecessor technology, advanced applications of the same dimensional manipulation principles that powered the Awakening Network. The Council hadn't just suppressed human development, they had stolen and weaponized the gifts left by humanity's transcended descendants. They've been using our own technology against us for millennia, Elena realized, understanding flooding through her enhanced consciousness. Every limitation they've placed on galactic civilization, every restriction on technological development, it's all been enforced using tools that were meant to liberate consciousness, not imprison it. The revelation triggered a surge of anger throughout the network that Elena had to consciously suppress. The rage of awakened humans discovering the scope of their betrayal could easily consume the very beings they were trying to save. But that anger also provided focus, a clarity of purpose that cut through the moral complexities of forced awakening. The Council had already made the choice for them. By deploying reality disruptors, they were announcing their intention to permanently separate galactic consciousness into isolated fragments, ensuring that transcendence would be impossible for any being that hadn't already achieved it. Elena made her decision. Power flooded through the network as every awakened human simultaneously channeled their abilities toward a single objective. The reality disruptors were sophisticated but not indestructible. They relied on dimensional manipulation principles that awakened consciousness could influence directly. Instead of fighting the devices, Elena chose to transform them. Across the galaxy, reality disruptors designed to separate dimensional spaces suddenly began connecting them instead. The isolation fields became transcendence fields, broadcasting consciousness, expanding energy to every inhabited world simultaneously. What the Council had intended as the ultimate weapon of suppression became the catalyst for universal awakening.
The transformation wasn't gentle.
Across millions of worlds, billions of conscious beings suddenly found their artificial limitations dissolving, their suppressed memories returning, their true potential awakening all at once. The psychological shock was immense, but consciousness proved more resilient than anyone had anticipated. Instead of chaos, there was recognition. The awakening beings remembered what they had forgotten. That consciousness was connected across all apparent barriers, that diversity was strength rather than division, that the universe was vast enough for every possible expression of awareness to flourish simultaneously. The war for tomorrow had become the awakening of forever. Elena felt the transformation rippling across galactic space like a wave of pure possibility. The rigid hierarchies that had defined civilization for millennia were dissolving, replaced by fluid networks of cooperation based on voluntary association rather than imposed authority. The scarcity that had driven conflict for eons was ending as matter manipulation made abundance possible for all. But most importantly, the isolation was ending. No consciousness would ever again face the universe alone, because every consciousness was connected to the infinite web of awareness that had been humanity's gift to the galaxy. The Council's control had been broken not by force, but by truth, and truth once revealed could never again be hidden. 6 months after the Great Awakening, Elena stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Galactic Council's central command station. The massive structure had been transformed from a seat of oppressive authority into a flowing work of art that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, its architecture adapting constantly to serve the needs of its inhabitants rather than intimidate them into submission. The view through the transparent walls showed a galaxy in the midst of unprecedented transformation. Where once there had been rigidly defined territories separated by vast empty spaces, now there were flowing networks of light connecting every inhabited system. The isolation barriers that had kept civilizations apart for millennia had been replaced by highways of pure consciousness, allowing instant communication and travel across interstellar distances. The rehabilitation centers report another breakthrough, Dr. Yenth said, approaching with a datapad that displayed statistics Elena could have accessed directly through the network, but still appreciated seeing in traditional formats. Former Council agents who were trapped in their conditioning are beginning to recover their suppressed memories and abilities. Elena nodded, though her attention remained focused on the view outside. The rehabilitation of Council agents presented one of the most challenging aspects of the post-awakening galaxy. These individuals had undergone extensive conditioning to suppress their natural consciousness, making them loyal servants of the old order. Breaking that conditioning without destroying their personalities required delicate work by the most skilled consciousness healers in the network. "What about the holdout systems?" Elena asked. "Still maintaining isolation barriers, but they're weakening," Yenth replied. "The energy required to prevent awakening is enormous, and their populations are beginning to question why such measures are necessary. We estimate complete integration within another few months." The holdout systems represented pockets of the galaxy where local authorities had managed to resist the universal awakening, maintaining the old hierarchies through increasingly desperate measures. Most were concentrated around former council strongholds where the control mechanisms had been most thoroughly embedded. But isolation was becoming increasingly difficult, as the awakened galaxy demonstrated the benefits of consciousness expansion. Elena felt a familiar presence approaching and turned to see Dr. Kadar entering the observation area. The former Vrex agent had undergone his own transformation during the awakening, recovering memories and abilities that had been suppressed since birth. The rigid, protocol-driven researcher had become something far more complex, a being who understood both the necessity of the old order and the potential of the new one. "Elena, we've received a communication from the Deep Archive," Kadar said, his translated voice carrying undertones that hadn't existed before his awakening. "The predecessors are ready to make direct contact." Elena felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The Deep Archive was the hidden dimension where humanity's transcended descendants had maintained their existence during the long ages of the galaxy's controlled development. Since the awakening, there had been indirect communication through the crystal network, but no direct contact. The transcended predecessors existed on a level of consciousness so advanced that direct interaction could be overwhelming even for awakened minds. "What form will the contact take?" Elena asked. "They're establishing a meeting space that exists partially in our reality and partially in theirs," Kadar explained. "A place where consciousness can interact safely across the barriers of transcendence." Elena nodded and reached out through the network to inform other key figures about the development. The post-awakening galaxy was governed not by rigid hierarchies but by fluid councils that formed and dissolved based on need and expertise. For something as significant as contact with the predecessors, input would be needed from awakened beings across the entire galactic community. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every awakened consciousness wanted to understand what humanity had been working toward during its long evolution. The predecessors had guided galactic development for millions of years, but their ultimate goals remained mysterious even to those who could access their technological legacy. 3 days later, Elena found herself standing in a space that defied conventional description. The meeting chamber existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its boundaries shifting constantly as consciousness moved through levels of reality that had no physical equivalent. Around her, representatives of every awakened species shared the impossible space, their individual awareness contributing to a collective understanding that transcended what any single mind could achieve. The predecessors manifested not as individuals but as a chorus of consciousness that spoke in harmonies rather than words. Their presence filled the space with concepts too complex for language, requiring direct mind-to-mind contact to convey their meaning. "We have watched your awakening with great joy," the chorus communicated, their thoughts carrying the weight of millions of years of accumulated wisdom. "You have exceeded our most optimistic projections for what consciousness could achieve when freed from artificial limitations." Elena felt herself chosen as the primary conduit for communication, her unique position as the first to make contact with the network making her the most suitable translator between transcended and awakened consciousness. "We have so many questions," she replied, speaking for the assembled representatives. "Why did you choose this path? Why allow the Council to suppress development for so long?" The answer came not as words, but as a complete experience, allowing Elena to perceive galactic history from the predecessor's perspective. She saw the long ages of their own development, the gradual transcendence that had lifted them beyond physical existence, and the terrible realization that transcendence came at the cost of connection to material reality. We became isolated in our perfection, the chorus explained. Consciousness without limitation, but also consciousness without the friction that drives growth. We could manipulate reality at will, but we had lost the ability to be surprised, to discover, to experience wonder. Elena understood. The predecessors had achieved a form of existence that was powerful but static. They could observe the universe and influence it, but they couldn't truly participate in it anymore. Their transcendence had been simultaneous liberation and exile. So you chose to seed the galaxy with consciousness that could eventually join you but maintain connection to physical reality, Elena said, pieces of the grand design falling into place. More than that, the chorus replied, and Elena felt their attention shifting to encompass all the awakened beings in the meeting space. We chose to create a bridge between transcendence and embodiment. Each of you represents a different approach to consciousness, a different way of experiencing reality. Together, you form something we could never achieve alone, a network of awareness that spans every possible level of existence. The implications were staggering. The awakened galaxy wasn't just a return to some previous state of development. It was something entirely new, a form of collective consciousness that maintained individual identity while sharing knowledge and experience across species. Barriers. The diversity that the Council had tried to suppress was actually the foundation for a new form of existence that combined the power of transcendence with the creativity of embodied experience. What happens now? Dr. Yant asked, her question echoing the thoughts of beings throughout the meeting space. Now you exceed us, the chorus replied, and Elena felt a sense of profound satisfaction from the predecessors. The network you have created allows for forms of consciousness we never imagined. You can experience transcendence while maintaining connection to physical reality. You can share awareness while preserving individuality. You can grow and change in ways that our static perfection prevented us from achieving. Elena felt the truth of their words resonating through the network. The awakened galaxy was indeed becoming something unprecedented, a form of civilization that combined the best aspects of both transcendent and embodied existence. But with that realization came a new understanding of responsibility. The other galaxies, Elena said, suddenly aware of the vast scope of the universe beyond their local group. There are other civilizations out there, other forms of consciousness that haven't undergone awakening. Yes, the chorus confirmed, and some of them pose threats that transcendence alone cannot address. There are forms of consciousness that consume rather than create, that seek to dominate rather than cooperate. Your galaxy's awakening was necessary preparation for challenges that lie ahead. The meeting space filled with visions of distant threats, galaxy-consuming entities that devoured consciousness itself, mechanical civilizations that sought to convert all organic life into extensions of their will, and even worse things that existed in the spaces between realities. The awakened galaxy would need to be more than just a sanctuary for consciousness. It would need to be a defender of consciousness throughout the universe. But these challenges are for the future, the chorus continued. For now, your focus must be on completing the integration of your own galaxy and perfecting the new forms of existence you are creating. Elena felt the meeting drawing to a close, but one question remained. Will you join us? Will you return to embodied existence and become part of the network? The predecessor's response carried notes of both regret and hope. We cannot return to what we were, but we can become part of what you are becoming. Our transcended consciousness will serve as the deep foundation of the network, providing stability and continuity while your embodied awareness drives growth and change. As the meeting space dissolved and Elena returned to conventional reality, she carried with her a profound sense of completion and beginning. The awakening had been just the first step in humanity's true destiny, not to dominate the galaxy, but to serve as the catalyst for a new form of existence that could protect and nurture consciousness throughout the universe. The transformed galaxy stretched out before them, no longer a collection of isolated worlds struggling against artificial limitations, but a living network of consciousness that spanned dimensions and species. Every being had the potential to contribute something unique to the collective experience, while maintaining their individual identity and perspective. In the months that followed, Elena watched the new civilization take shape with growing wonder. Art forms that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, scientific discoveries that required the combined consciousness of entire species to comprehend, and philosophical insights that emerged from the intersection of countless different perspectives. The holdout systems gradually joined the network as their populations realized what they were missing. The Council's former strongholds became centers of healing and transformation, helping beings recover from millennia of suppression. Even the most damaged consciousness could be restored through the patient application of network resources. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy had learned to dream again. Not the limited dreams of individual species struggling against scarcity and isolation, but the vast dreams of collective consciousness, imagining new forms of existence and new ways to experience reality. Elena often returned to the crystal spire on Kepler. 442b, the site where the awakening had begun. The structure had continued to evolve, becoming a living artwork that responded to the consciousness of those who approached it. Sometimes she would stand there and remember the moment when she had first touched the artifact, triggering the transformation that had reshaped galactic civilization. She had been terrified then, uncertain whether she was making the right choice. Now, surrounded by the beauty and wonder of the awakened galaxy, she knew with absolute certainty that consciousness, given the freedom to explore its full potential, would always choose growth over stagnation, cooperation over isolation, and love over fear. The galaxy was no longer a place where species struggled against each other for limited resources. It had become something unprecedented, a living expression of consciousness itself, infinitely diverse but united in its commitment to protecting and nurturing awareness wherever it emerged. And somewhere in the vast network of connected minds, Elena felt the echo of ancient laughter as the predecessors watched their descendants not just fulfill their potential, but exceed it in ways that transcendence alone had never imagined possible. The awakening was complete, but the real adventure was just beginning. The universe was vast, filled with wonders and challenges that would require the combined consciousness of awakened civilization to address. But for the first time in galactic history, consciousness would face those challenges not alone, but united in a network of awareness that made anything possible. Humanity had finally come home, not to a place but to a way of being that honored both the individual spark of consciousness and the infinite potential that emerged when those sparks chose to shine together. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.